I'm Wendy Hager. I'm RDA's Vice President this year, and I welcome you to the final lecture in the RSA RDA Spring Series entitled Projective Infrastructures. It is organized by Christopher Hight, who's Associate Professor at the Rice School of Architecture. This lecture series is part of the school's spring programming that includes lectures at Farish Gallery. You're all invited. Please see RSA's website for more details. You can see a little bit about it on our slide here. Also, please take a moment to view the list of our generous 2016 underwriters and lecture sponsors for this series. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. And also a big thanks to tonight's reception sponsors, co-sponsors, Clark Condon Associates and Lauren Griffith Associates. We also thank the Rice School of Architecture and Dean Sarah Whiting for their continued support of our organization and mission. And we're very grateful, as always, to the Museum of Fine Arts, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, of course, for the use of this wonderful auditorium. Thank you very much. Like to recognize we have at least one elected official here tonight. We've got David Robinson, our council member at large, who not only represents the design community, but also is a former student of our speaker tonight. So do we have any other elected officials out here tonight? Okay, well, thank you. And next month, the Cultural Landscape Foundation will hold their second annual conference, Leading with Landscape, which is March 11th here in Houston. Please check their website for the speaker schedule and tours. In April, RDA's 41st annual residential tour is scheduled for April 9th and 10th. Nourish will feature 6 contemporary houses and their edible gardens. Visit RDA's website for more information on this tour and other RDA programs. Also, a reminder to those of you who are logging your CEUs, the registration lists are located on the tables at the entrance to the auditorium. So if you missed it on the way in, catch it on the way out. Tonight, as a courtesy to our speaker, please silence your cell phones, and we prefer no flash photography tonight. And now, Christopher Hight will introduce our fabulous speaker.
The morning after Hurricane Ike, I left my house, as many other Houstonians, to find a city covered with debris, tree limbs, garbage, strewed everywhere, often neck deep. And as I walked down the street, a street without, like most of Houston, any power, I walked by one lawn, one house, which had a tree that had cloven the house in two. It had basically bifurcated the house. It split it in two. And yet, the owner of the house was in the front of the yard, finishing up edging his lawn. The lawn was immaculate, perfect, not a blade of grass or a leaf out of place. All the debris carefully piled into, he must have been an architect because they were perfectly formed mounds of limbs and various other debris, right? This in a city, or at least on our street, a street that did not have power for 3.5 weeks. And this struck me, that this strange relationship between cultural value, the value we place on very strange things we call lawns, and we know that Texans love their lawns, and the importance of these vast infrastructures that are around us have a complicated relationship. We will tend to our little patch of pseudo-nature, our little lawn, and even amidst a total collapse of the massive infrastructures that give our lives, make our daily lives possible. Infrastructure is often seen as boring, but serious, while design is seen as cool and flighty. We can be responsible, green, sustainable, and so on, or we can be star architects. Design is branding, infrastructure is a matter of life and death. Design is right in front of us, in our face, screaming at us. Infrastructure is only apparent when it breaks. Yet throughout the series, we have seen how innovations in the way we practice and the instruments of our practice, the way we represent the world, can be leveraged both for the advancement of our fields of design and for the increased agency of the designer to inflect processes and create new possibilities for projects in our city. And that experiments to expand disciplinary knowledge can also advance our pragmatic capacity to mediate in the forces and agencies shaping our cities. We've also seen how practices blur, hybridize, and mix up the traditional categories of landscape architecture and urbanism. Tonight's speaker, Deanna Balmori's practice and her life has done both of these continuously, in practice, in books, in teaching, and in research, and in all of the cross relations between those two things, all those things. She first studied architecture as an undergraduate and subsequently completed a PhD in urban history at UCLA before she undertook formal education in landscape architecture. She became a partner at Silvercup Associates, in which she initiated and led the firm's landscape architecture division before, in 1990, she founded her own firm, Balmori Associates, in New York City. She has taught in numerous universities and held prestigious endowed chairs, including the Davenport Chair of Architectural Design, as well as the William Henry Bishop Visiting Professor of Architectural Design at Yale, where she has taught in various capacities since 1993, including as a faculty member of the Yale School of Forestry. Her service activities are too numerous to list, but include a board member of the Van Allen Institute, a member of the Civic Alliance World Trade Center Memorial Committee, Comprehensive Design Landscape Plan for the White House Committee, and the National Rails Trail Organization. A continuous thread in all this work has been an interest in understanding the way we represent and draw the world and our designs, and our capacity to intervene and understand the worlds that we occupy and which we're shaping. In 2006, she founded BioLab, an experimental research group within the firm to advance investigations as part of a practice. She has co-organized and edited a symposium and a book, Mapping in the Age of Digital Media, at Yale University, and published a recent book, Drawing and Reinventing Landscape in 1914. And a landscape manifesto published in 2010 argues that to realign ecological processes and technological processes, to realign the way we live with the way we may want to live, requires innovations in forms, in design itself. And another characteristic of her work, and integral to that, is that tactical operations on sites can have large butterfly effects upon vast fields in which we find ourselves. That it is perhaps in shifting our understanding from the small grain of our cities, from everyday and ubiquitous things like lawns and leaf piles, of gardens and roofs, that shifting these and transforming these can be just as important as the massive top-down projects that get so much attention. It's been 15 years or so since she's been here, but I certainly hope it's not that long until she returns. Please welcome Deanna Balmori to Rice.
Good evening, I'm very happy to be here. I have had a reintroduction to Houston today, and it certainly is very different than Houston that I saw 15 years ago. I'm starting with a sort of preface. The brushstroke that you see up there is trying to say a couple of things. The first one is that landscape architecture is an art. The second is that although 10 years ago we had very clear defined limits and lines in between the professions, so that you really had a black and white break with a very severe line. Like, for example, the line that landscape architects had to respect of 5 feet outside the envelope of a building. That was their territory, and the architect had up to those 5 feet, and there was a very clear line, and it was a contractual line. So what we are in today is in a very different situation, and architecture, landscape, engineering are having much more of blurry edges and step into each other's surfaces and into each other's disciplines. So given that change and the changes that are occurring also in our physical world, it's that the idea of creating Bal Lab came about, in which we actually do research about certain things and try certain ideas out, while the rest of the office works on the projects. And I want to show you an example of the interaction between the two. We started doing work on one green roof at the sort of 2001. The whole industry of green roofs was in its infancy, and certainly the industry of the nurseries for green roofs was certainly non-existent at the time. And we did a small roof for an ecological organization called Earthworks. And it interested us very much to think of what that could do to transform a city. So we decided to take a piece of city, Long Island City in New York City, and say, okay, what happens if we take all the surfaces of parking lots and of roofs in this area, and how much green surface can we obtain? Let's think of green roofs really at a very big scale. So we took Long Island City, which is across from Manhattan, and on the Queensboro Bridge, and counted that area of roofs and parking lots. And we were totally surprised that we came up with the surface of Olmsted's Park in Brooklyn, Prospect Park, and thought, how incredible, because we know we can't create a Prospect Park anywhere in a big city today. It's too many acres. It's an enormous piece. Those cities are already created. There's no way you can get that. So I thought, well, but how incredible. We can take these green roofs and as an aggregate, create surfaces that do the ecological services of a park by doing this very simple step of putting a green roof on it. So we were interested in thinking of it at a sort of city scale. Out of that, we presented this in Long Island City, and out of that, we got 2 pieces of work. One was the Silvercup Studios, the television studios, that at the time became the first really big roof in New York City. And we did this also for a small furniture manufacturer. And with this, we sort of thought, well, okay, if this is the sort of minimum green roof, because they were minimum, they were not they were the extensive and not the intensive green roofs. They did not allow you to go on them. But both the owners wanted the effect of the ecological effects that the green roof would have, and we had it measured and were able to really be totally sure that these function and did the sort of things that a green roof can do by slowing water after big storms, by really reducing air conditioning and heating below them, etc. And we did a whole series of green roofs in New York City, all small works, but sort of using but not anything that went any further. The first thing that went further with that idea was this piece of work in Seville, Spain. And it's under construction. The original idea occurred many, many years ago. I think it was 2007. And but it's only being finished now because the crisis came in Spain and stopped everything for a very long while. Anyway, there was a tower for a hotel, and there was two low commercial buildings. And the buildings were going to have the usual air conditioners and exhaust pipes, etc. on it. And we talked to the owner about really making gardens there, and sort of taking it further and making it a walk that combined with a walk that goes to the water by the river and goes around the very extensive land and piece of land on which this sits, and also connects to the sports club that's underneath. So that made it suddenly part of the urban compensation. It wasn't a private thing up there. The public could go here and could tie it into walking features and the sports club. So this is under construction now and should be finished in a year. And there's the state at which it is in. So that was carrying the idea of the green roof a bit further. In 2007, we won an international competition for doing a new city, an administrative city, which the president of Korea at the time wanted to take pressure off of Seoul and move half of the government offices to outside and be the basis of creating a new city. For that, 26 ministries were going to move there. And so we worked with a Korean firm of Haean, but actually that is a colossal firm in Korea, thousands of people, and architects and engineers. But they had just started a small office in New York City, H Associates, with only 2 people, and I knew one of them. And so we were able to sit down and work together on the idea for the city. And the idea was to create a continuous building that would be only 6 stories high, and that it would basically say that government was accessible by being in a low building, given that all the buildings in Korea, in South Korea, are mainly towers, and that at the same time that this would work as a building into it, a public space that was continuous. So the 6th floor was conceived as a park, and it would serve all the people that worked in the 26 ministries. So the idea now begins to shape of the green roof, what was a lowly green roof, begins to shape the architecture. And this is the plan. It's a continuous roof, but the buildings are really tucked underneath the roof. And this was the generation of the form by taking tangents to the topography. And this is at the state that it's in now. in which there's one section still to be finished, but it's nearly there. It'll be in a matter of months. The section, and seeing it from above. The walk is 4 kilometers, about 2.5 miles, and the cafeteria is at one end. So everybody goes out for a 2.5 mile walk for lunch, going and coming back another 2.5 miles. So it's good exercise. We all know now 21st form of landscape, which is a linear park, and you have it in your bayous here, which takes over either old infrastructure or follows lines of coasts or rivers. And this 14-mile plan, master plan for New Haven, you can see the green, the New Haven green with its 3 churches there. And then you see the line that goes here. And this is the railroad station of New Haven. So this was conceived as a bike and pedestrian piece. But what is interesting about it is that this piece actually stops in right in between, in the middle of the Yale campus, in between Yale Science Hill and Yale campus. So we proposed that instead this part be a tram that takes you from the station to Yale. The station is very sort of disconnected from the rest of the city, and it's a walk that's quite unpleasant into town. And so this could serve something that Yale has needed for a very long time. But that part didn't get done. Anyway, this was the sort of presentation in which they were trying to convince the different parties, the railroad line and the city people, to do this. And by presenting drawings about the feasibility of this, the community group which had formed to save the land had really succeeded finally in getting it to happen. But all of these linear parks have a very hard time coming into the center of the city. The real estate interests are then very, very heavy and formed, and land is too expensive, so that it usually fails to enter into a city. The added complication to this master plan was that entering into the city, well, I'm going to go and show you here, which is at this point, this piece of land all was owned by Yale University. It was a gift from Andrew Mellon. So it added another player to the game, which complicated it. And at first Yale would have nothing to do with it, saying issues of security worried it. And the change of president at Yale finally brought a president that was more sympathetic to the city and to the interests of the community group, and it happened. So it's about 4 blocks, but it allowed the linear park to really enter into the heart of the city, which was, as it entered, went underground, went below grade. And this is how it was as it started and as it is today. The part that has not happened, of course, is that the end of this part could have had the tram. It's added a pedestrian bridge across it too, which makes the two sides more connected. But it's produced a very important effect in town. This is a project that we sort of invented. We were asked by a group by a community group to really try to study some way of system of lighting for the whole section of Broadway, one of the oldest roads in New York City. And when we started to grapple with it, we realized that the issue was a bigger one, and though lighting could be helpful along the corridor, the issue was that this could be a continuous linear park that could be used by walkers and bikers, but not in its present condition. So we looked at seeing if it was at all possible to consider that there would be adding a bike lane and to use different sorts of energies there. This was how the median of Broadway was in 1900. And in fact, it had a path that allowed you to walk for many miles. And what happened was that the adding of more and more cars took more and more space away from the median, and this is all that's left today. And so nobody really uses it. And there's a sort of bench at one end and a garbage can and these concrete barriers, and that is all. So, but because DOTs all over the country have become more open about taking space away from cars and giving it to pedestrians, I think that in the long run it might be possible to consider this. And we were thinking of having an operation that used the energy of both the subway that runs underneath it and of the cars that run by it. And it's, as an idea, it was developed in Bell Lab, and we are trying to find ways of having it come to pass. There were 5 teams that were selected from an RFQ to develop a pilot sort of bridge system for crossing, for wildlife crossing. And the wildlife crossing has become rather important, particularly in the West, in which lots of species cross the road and get killed, but they need the spatial continuity, they need larger space, they need the distribution of space of certain things which they go after. So the 5 teams were asked to simply produce a model by which they could be presented to different DOTs across the country and eventually get built. We were all told to work on Colorado because there was an urgent need there for one bridge, and also to make us work in a specific place. Because Colorado has now a blue pine kill by which thousands of acres of blue pines are dead, we thought that would there be some way of using that blue pine to work on this. And we looked for an engineer, a structural engineer that would be interested in doing a wood bridge. And we worked with Nickerson Helbig, a German structural engineer that had opened a small office in New York City. And so we based it on using this system, which basically is glue-lam, which with some very long screws in parts of a lot of stress, but it's layered. It's a series of layers of this glue-lam, which in a very interesting manner also reflects the contours of the land above. So this was the proposal, and it's making its way through all the different places. And it's reproducible. It's not set for a particular site. It's really based on being able to use wood, and as we know, there is wood kill of ash in the Midwest. There's wood kill of several trees on the Northeast. But it's material that unfortunately is very available, but could take different forms. The master plan for Bilbao, Spain, which was a long-term job, many projects came out of that. I mention here for only two things: that it was an effort to weave a piece of city together from a place that had become vacant, and also with 4 or 5 aims of connectivity. So the space came available because the port, which could not take containers and was too small, was moved to the mouth of the river. And the piece of land available was very close to downtown. So one of the aims was to simply give it as much open space as possible, because the old town has very little open green space. The other issue that we were presented with was the fact that the river floods several times a year and needed to be allowed to flood. There was no way of containing it, given also that the river had all been made with now concrete walls, which couldn't be changed, although we tried. So in this diagram, what we attempted to do was the following. One, to open the city here to the river and do a linear park that followed the river, and at the same time that this area would be able to flood, and so goes raising in value, in height. The Guggenheim had been the first to go there, Frank Gehry's museum, and the second thing was to take the 8-lane highway and convert it into a boulevard with a central green space that had a tram on it, and a tram that would connect it to the central station where all the systems of transportation meet. And the next thing we proposed was a bridge, a pedestrian bridge, that will go from a university on the other side of the river and allow the students to go straight into downtown here, which resulted in the university then purchasing 2 of the pieces of land, one for the library and one for the administration of the university. So all of these things, amazingly, came to pass. This is the linear park around the edge, floodable. You can see it from the river here. This is what was the 8-lane highway, which got transformed into a boulevard with the tram connecting to the main station. The pedestrian bridge built by a Spanish architect from the university, which has these 2 buildings leading to being able to cross and reach downtown. And a sort of winding road coming down with 5% slope to the museum and to the river. And this is the straight shot to downtown, downtown being somewhere there. Now this is in a way a start of the work with water, which has become a very important part of the work of our office and something that interests us very much. This is an old project done in 1996 and chosen then as one of the 10 best projects of water in that year. It's in Minnesota, and it really represents the growth of a suburb, a new suburb for the city of Minneapolis, quite far away. It's 17 miles. And a developer was ready to build 500 houses, mid-priced, and the town of Farmington, town council, was very worried because the year before they'd had enormous amount of floods in the Mississippi Valley, and particularly in this site. And they had had a flood of a new project that was just up from this one. So they did not want simply the water that the project would create to be put in a pipe and sent to the river. So we were asked to look at this and see if we could come up with another plan. And the thing that occurred to us is if we could obtain more land, that it could create open space. This is the time to create open space when the development is just starting and you have lots of land. If that could be possible, that we would create a park that would deal with the water, drain the water, and at the same time be a resource for the whole development. So the whole drainage of the project would come here, and this, which was a borrow pit, would serve as a place to put this in. I can't seem to make it work now. The red spot. Anyway, all the way to the right, and that the water system would curve as much as possible to slow it down, and that it was planted at different layers of planting that could take the water at different intervals and clean the water. So, and when it reached a certain level, it would turn back and move